Welcome, everybody. We are working now on the exercises for Unit 3 in the database class. And you see me kind of like fumbling to get in there because I just had the screen open and then moved away from it. We just went through the lecture materials and now we're about to work on this assignment. I just posed this question here to class because this is our first assignment in the course where we are using either the attached or linked document to answer the questions. So like the queries that you're being asked to run are indicated in that document. And then when you capture the output of your queries, that'll go back into the document and you end up submitting the document. Question I posed here in class is how many of you prefer to use Microsoft Word, which was actually a pretty small percentage. And it seemed that the larger percentage was using Google Docs, although it's a very small sample size. I generally think that most people now tend to go to Google Docs first because it's just a little bit easier to get to. So if you click on the assignment title, you can download the Word document here, right? So I'll just grab it and open it so you can see it. It's basically the same document, by the way. And so the concept is you grab the document, follow the instructions, and then run the suggested query, and then wherever you see a sample here, you would delete that image and copy and paste your screen grabs into that spot. That's how you would do it. If you prefer to use the Google Docs, you can use the link here. It'll take you to Google Docs, and I probably should have done open a new tab. This is where it got messed up before, I guess. And what I suggest that you do here is that you start by, you can make a copy, right, and name it any way you wish, because otherwise, you know, this is my original, so you can't really edit it, so you have to basically make a copy of it anyhow. And you follow the same procedure, right? So do the query as suggested, take the image, delete it, paste in your own screenshots, right? And then when you're all done, you would do a download as a Word document, and that's your submit. The other thing that I will say up front is if it's helpful for you to have a backup of your SQL code, you can also attach your SQL code file if you wish to the homework submission, and then I have a backup copy. Although for me, screenshots generally are enough for this stuff. But no harm done if you turn in the SQL code as well. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, let's get into actually doing it. I do have the Word document open here, so that's the one I'm going to work on just because it's open on my system right now. And so I use this to do the prompts for MySQL. And then we'll write the code, paste in our stuff. I'll demonstrate it once, the copy paste of the screenshots. And then from there on in, I'm just going to do straight coding. All right, let's make sure that we're working on the right database. Let's make sure that our database is running. And I know I've done this every week so far, but for those of you that have installed MySQL Server and MySQL Workbench, what I always say is like, typically MySQL Server automatically starts with your system if you allow it to. I make the conscious choice not to. And some of you may have done the same thing just because you watched my videos. So I'm going into my task manager here, and you saw I did a right click on the taskbar to get here. I click on services. I find that product in the services list here. And right now I see that it's running, and I'm going to leave it that way, right? Because that's what I want. I want my server to be running, right? Since it's running, I can close this panel. I can go into my start menu, pull up MySQL Workbench, and then we can start looking at the prompts and start coding. I'm going to connect to my local instance here. My password is already saved on that panel. You might be prompted for yours. If so, type it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this file here. And I'm going to say don't save because I think that one contains all the answers, by the way. And I will kind of try to remember here, last time we were in class, and you guys might have to refresh my memory on this. We had loaded up in Unit 2 two databases. You guys recall that, right? And we partially as an experiment, right? So here, the first one we played with was the classic models database. That's the one we're going to be using today, by the way. And then for the assignment, we ended up doing the My Guitar Shop. So in your MySQL workbench over here in the schemas navigator, and if you're not seeing that and you're seeing administration, you guys notice how there's two tabs here. So if you're not seeing schemas, you can just click that little tab right there to make that apparent. This is kind of a weird little thought here. I'm going to turn on this tool because sometimes my cursor's kind of small. And let me see if that, all right, so apparently it's not working. Sometimes I can get it to highlight. I'll play with that later, I guess. But right now you should see in your schemas table, classic models and My Guitar Shop. Knowing that we're using classic models, right? I'm going to open up a new SQL code window. And notice how I did that? I went to the toolbar here and hit the first icon, or you go to the file menu and just say new file, new open, no. Okay, I guess it doesn't have a new file tab there. All right, so just use that first one to create a new SQL file. I think that's kind of strange, frankly. All right, so now that we're in here, we know we're going to use classic models. So let's go ahead and type our use statement preemptively so we're not like going, hey, it didn't work later. So I'm just going to type in the database name, put in a semicolon at the end. So use classic models, notice all lowercase to match what's in the schema table. And then we'll go ahead and run that query. Looks like it succeeded. So now we're ready to write the rest of the code. So I'm going to bop back over to the document. Right, and I have this information here. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, wouldn't it be handy so I don't have to bounce back and forth? Let's copy this text and I'm going to bring it over to my SQL document and I'm going to paste it in there, but I'm going to use my CSS style commenting marks. You notice how I'm doing that? So it's / star / and then I can paste that inside here. And then I'm also noticing that it's not word wrapping. So I'm hitting the last button on the toolbar here to see where I'm at to word wrap. So the directive is display the order number and customer name of all the orders from the order table and the customers table. Sort by customer name. It says you will need to join the order and customer tables, right? I guess that's implied. But I do want to kind of demonstrate this doing it two different ways, right? Remember the lecture we just did? You can brute force this. You can just say, I want it to come from this table and from this table. And you can put both of them in the from statement. So here's where I'm going to get a little bit weird with this. First, I'm going to put in a little snippet here. So the first demo is without doing a join, right? To just kind of show that that's doable. And I'm going to put in select, from, and where preemptively, because I'm just telling you guys, this is how my brain thinks. I look at like what tables I'm pulling stuff from first. So I usually start with the from statements. Like what tables am I using? Oh, I'm going to use orders, comma, customers. So, right. So that's my approach. I think from like table and then columns. But now that we write the select statement, we were told, right, display the order number and the customer name of all orders from the orders and customers table. That's a mouthful. All right, so let's break that apart. So we need, in a way though, and this is kind of one of those things that you're going to have to get into this mode of remembering this. Like, unless you know your database by heart, like what all the columns are, often what you end up doing is it's like, okay, if we're using the orders table and the customers table, well, it told us to. What are the columns in the orders table? Remember, you can click on the schema table and then you can see them on the list here. So the order number is in the orders table. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And then the customers has, well, customer number, yada, 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 yada. And then, okay, well, that has customer information. So obviously, the order number is going to come from the orders table, right? So I'm going to select order number. And then the other thing that we need to grab is the customer name. Now, I know we just talked about aliasing, and I'm going to add aliasing in just a moment, but I want to show you don't have to alias anything. Okay. So we're going to grab the order number and the customer name. I know from just looking at the column names, order number comes from orders, customer name comes from customer. Okay. And do I need any where statements here? No, we weren't really asked to do that. We were just basically asked of all the orders from the order table and customers table. So I'm just going to put a semicolon at the end of the statement, and I'm going to run it. Right. I'm doing the selective run, the second lightning bolt. The cursor's on that code, and let's do it. All right. So here's our output. I'm just kind of move that out of the way a little bit so you can see it. So all the order numbers and all the customer is. You notice how like the output is though? It's kind of weird. This kind of sort of makes sense, right? We don't really know where the information is coming from. Let's make this better in a couple different ways. Let's try aliasing stuff first. This is not very pretty, you know, with no spaces and camel casing. So let's alias that as, and notice I'm using quotes here, order number, maybe something like that. I don't know if you like that better, or if you can just put a space in between. With the customer name, let's alias that with a space in it. We'll say customer name. Create much nicer looking output. Let's run it again. All right, I mean, we're basically getting the same output, correct? But the column headers are a little cleaner looking, easier to read. Remember, it depends on who our audience is. Sometimes you just do it for yourself. Another reason to do it too, real frankly, is if the column name is super, super long, this is a way to kind of truncate it a little bit. And some people might abbreviate and say CUST, space name, whatever works for you. All right. To make the output a little bit nicer, and actually because we're asked to do it, sort by customer name. Right, so I'm going to add one more statement here, which is the order by is our sorting statement, right? Order by, what are we doing it by? Customer name. Right. So here's the final, we'll call it brute force method of joining tables together without using a join statement. And generally speaking, you can do this, but I want you to notice how the output is. There's a little bit of weirdness to it. You know, especially look how long the output is. Yeah, okay. Let's try the other approach, and let's now do the inner join. So this is really the second approach here is really the correct answer for number one, by the way. And then I make a little note in there. Notice the difference in the results. We can run the first one again if you want to notice the difference. So let's rewrite this. Some of it's already done, right? So I can take this statement, right? Because that's what we're selecting, correct? But we're going to use an inner join. Now, remember when you do an inner join, we're going to choose one table to be the primary table. So I'm not going to put two table names in the from statement. I'm just going to use one. So whichever one I want to be on the left, basically, is kind of how it goes. So I'm going to say orders. Oh, I got to say from. Sorry about that. So I'm going to say from orders. And then we're going to inner join that with customers. Right. And while I can do it this way, and that's basically an inner join anyhow, or is it? This is the question. This implies something else. Remember, the inner join means the intersection of information. All right. Now, I want to read the assignment description again. Display the order number, customer name of all orders from the order table and customers table, sort by customer name. But I do want to have some criteria for this. And you know what? I can order by customer name, so I can copy that last line, and let's just do that and drop it in here. But I'm going to add one more line when I'm all done, and I left a spot for it. But let's run it like this and see how it goes. I'm trying to get my mouse back over here. All right. This looks basically the same as what we just did. Now, how could I make this a little bit more meaningful? Well, I don't know if you guys are kind of picking up on the fact that we're joining, but we don't have joining criteria because we don't really have a where clause. We're not filtering a darn thing here. So what I would say is more useful is we add a where statement and we say something to the effect. So from the orders table, we're looking at, the customer number, where that is equal to the customers, customer number. Now, keeping in mind that the customers table has a customer number, that's its main ID field, and the orders table has a spot for the customer number as well. And I want you to notice something really interesting about relational databases and the highlighting here. Why is customer number at the bottom of the orders table bold? That's because that's a linked field. That one is connected relationally to the customer number in the customers table. Here it's the primary key, or the ID for the whole table. In the orders table, this is what we would call a foreign key. We haven't learned about these concepts yet, but the fact that it's bold indicates that it's linked to another table. So they're linkable, right? That's why I can do this. And notice I'm taking customer numbers in one table, customers, and linking it to the customer number in the orders table. Watch the difference in the results. So ultimately, I say this is the correct answer for this exercise. And notice the output. And I'm trying to arrange the screen. Now look how much cleaner the output is and really much more accurate to what the question was being asked. So what was happening before is if Alpha Cognac was ordering 20 products on order 10136, I would get 20 listings for that order number, right? So it wasn't filtering it down. It was listing every product that was on the order as well. And it's like, why is this information redundant? And that's the why. The other little takeaway from kind of like what I was just doing here, and I don't know if you guys are feeling it, is when you're writing a query, nobody says you're going to write it right the first time. Sometimes you write it, see what the output is, and goes, that's not what I want. All right, well, how can I make it so it's more like what I want? And then you keep working it until you get what you want. And sometimes it takes a few attempts. And you don't have to make all the maneuvers at once. Let's get the tables joined first. Then maybe I'll alias it. Then maybe I'll come up with my filtering criteria. Okay, now I finally have what I want. Right, so that's kind of the goal. So if this is your final query, now you can do your screenshot, right? And I'm only going to demonstrate this once in this video, by the way. I'm going to take my snipping tool or the screenshot tool if you're on a Mac. I'm going to grab my code and my results. They happen to fit pretty well together on the screen, so I'm grabbing them together. I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to go back to my document. I'm going to take the sample image and just remove it and paste in mine. So number one is done. I want you to be mindful of the fact of the font sizes inside my screenshots, that the fonts are about the same size as the text in the document. If the font is significantly smaller, I will have a hard time reading it, and I might ask you to redo it. So just be mindful. Be efficient with your screenshots, and if necessary, when your queries get long, you can do multiple screenshots to get them captured. Another little tip, if you're using Google Docs, every time you make a change in the document, it automatically saves. Microsoft Word is not necessarily configured that way, and I'm pointing right here to the top of the screen. You guys notice that my auto save is off. That's not actually normal for Microsoft Word. It's supposed to be on. I tweak it off because of reasons of personal choice, right? Generally, if I'm writing a really large document, though, that should be on because it'll auto save like every 5 minutes or 3 minutes. I forget what the interval is. But that way you don't lose your work. With Google Docs, you don't even worry about it. So that might be a setting you want to turn on. All right, you guys all good here in the classroom? Online? All right. I'll assume you guys are okay. All right, let's move on to number 2. All right, so number 2 says modify the query in number 1 to use the following aliases. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Let's just do that. So we're just going to add. We're going to take the ugly looking order number and make it order no. And I think I kind of did that already in number 1, right? Okay, so I guess I'm kind of done. All right, but let's ramp it up a little bit, and maybe I should modify the document to say add aliasing for the table. So let's do that, because I kind of jumped the gun a little bit and answered number 2 right there. All right. And I'm going to say aliasing for number 2. That's just so I remember in the future. All right, so for number 2, I guess we're going to ramp that up, and I'm going to make a note to myself to tweak my assignment for next semester that I teach this. So we'll throw this stuff in, right? Okay, so this is easy. We can just copy paste all the code. Piece of cake. Task number 1 is complete, and really the task you're supposed to complete. But let's throw in the aliasing for a table because it's so darn easy to do. So be really methodical about this. Let's take orders and use the letter O. Let's take the customers table and use the letter C. This is just like the W3 schools examples that we were looking at. So now we need to be a little bit more mindful. And this is one of the things that's kind of interesting about this. This aliasing, at least in this situation, is not necessarily necessary. And I want you to hear me really clearly on that, right? Because clearly the query is working already. This is more about making the code cleaner than it is about making the query work right. So anywhere where I am declaring a table like orders, I will place the letter O in. And all I did is double click on orders, by the way, to highlight it. Handy tip, double click, then replace it with the letter C for customers. Now, those are an easy one to change because we know in advance, that we're pointing at same piece of information in 2 different tables. So here, the prefix of the table name is actually necessary because, right, it wouldn't make sense to try to equate the customer number from the customer table to the customer number in the customer table, if you feel what I'm saying. With the ones up top, though, and I think this is where table aliasing is actually kind of important. Okay, well, we know the order number only exists in the order table, but we also know that the customer name, well, actually, okay, the customer name only exists in the customer table. Okay. You see like my conundrum here? So really, I don't need to put table aliasing in front of it. However, and this is what I think a lot of smart coders do anyhow, is they put in the table alias so that we know when we come back to the code and look at our code, oh, it came from this table. I don't have to go like trying to figure it out. That's really I think the point here. Now, we are changing code. And so the smart thing to do is to make sure that it works right. But there's one spot in here where I'm kind of like not using the prefix, and I probably should. So we know the customer name is only in the customer table, but let's just keep that approach going once again, so we always have that point of reference. I'm not guessing now what table the information comes from. Right. Today, I know what table it comes from because I'm working on it right now. Step away for a week or a month or 5 years and then come back to the query. I'm like, what was this? And do you want to really spend the time backtracking it all? No, that's the answer. Let's run it, make sure it works. And it looks great. Any change in output from the previous one? No, it's the same output, but I'm going to say this is a better format. Right, for a lot of different reasons. Get your screenshots and move on. Right, so now we're going to do number 3. So let's go read the directions. All right, modify the query in number 2 to include the customer name Bain mini imports. All right, so now we're going to filter it down so that we're just getting that company's orders. Okay, once again, a copy paste works. So let's start with that and take the whole query that we have. There it is. And we just want to focus on that one customer. Now, that's part of a where clause when we're trying to filter down the contents. So we already have a bit of a where clause here. And remember, we learned about and or not. So we want the customer numbers and to match in both the orders and the customers table. That's still going to stay true, right? And that has to be true. Think about it logically. And then I'm going to go to the next line. I'm going to say, and we want the customer name to be like, and it's Bain with 2 A's, Bain mini imports. And you got to spell it correctly. 1 letter's off. This will start to break. Now, remember we talked about the like command. I could also wildcard it. I could do that. So the first part of it has to be exact, and anything that follows doesn't matter. You know what? I'll demonstrate both. And nothing else needs to change here, folks. This is the whole query. There's just one little tweak. So let's run it. All right, and it did filter. Let's try altering the like clause just temporarily. Let's put a wildcard in there. And let's run that. Same result. However, if there was a Bain, I don't know, max imports, it would also pull that result. There's not, but if there was, it would. Okay, so let's call this the correct answer then for number 3. You guys all good? Oop, not saving yet. Right, moving on to number 4. Let's make a spot for it here. Number 4 says, find it first here on my screen. Modify the query in number 1 to include the order date from the order table and only display those orders with an order date less than January 1st, 2004. So this is kind of weird. So if I say less than January 1st, 2004, does that mean before that date or after that date? A little bit of a brain bender. Should be an easy answer. I think of that as before. So this is kind of like dated information. I don't know what the point of it is really, but let's do that. So let's make that adjustment. Now, be mindful of the fact, right, that some of this stuff we've already built. Is there stuff that we can borrow from to do this? Now, it says modify the query in number one to include the order date from the order table. But you know what? We just did all this aliasing, right? Because like number two, I want you to think about it like this. Number two and number three, we're already building on top of number one, correct? So really we could copy number three and modify that. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm telling you that out loud. And it's kind of a logic thing, right? And granted, there's a bunch of extra stuff in here we might not need, but I can fix that, right? So let's just copy all of this. I'm doing a Control C to copy, and I'm pasting it in. Well, the first thing I know is this part's not important, right? And in fact, I'm going to keep the and keyword really. And really what I want to replace that with, because the customer numbers still have to match, is I'm going to look at the order date from the orders table. And how do I know it's there? Because it's right here on the screen on the left, right? You see that like in the column list. And then I want that to be less than the date. Now here's where it gets kind of weird. And I feel like I have to do the logical explanation of why we do it a date format the way I'm about to do it. So I'm going to just type this in symbolically here up top here, just to kind of make a point. Here in the US, when we do dates, we go like this: month, month, day, day, year, 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 right? That's like our standard format. Okay, not to blow your mind, but if you go over to Europe, they do it the other way around. Well, not the other way, but they go like this. They go day, day, month, month, year, year, year. So be mindful of that. If you ever go to Europe and people throw dates at you, they're doing this, and we do this. This is what we're used to in the US. Okay, weird though, databases store dates like this. First of all, they don't use forward slashes, they use dashes. And this is how I usually do my dates when I store them as file names on a system. It goes year, 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 month, month, day, day. That's how databases store their dates. And here's the why. The year is first, what year is it? Then the month, then the day. That's sortable, right? Because if you're trying to sort in order, numerically, that one makes the most sense. So that's how it stores in a database. So that's kind of an important thing to note. So if we're going to type in the date they suggest, which was 2004, January 1st. So this is the month, and this is the day, and I'm going to close it with a quote. It can be single or double, doesn't matter. And the other thing, and this is implied, by the way, and this is kind of a logical leap. We're going to be sorting by date. How do I know it worked? And let me show you. If I run this query right now, it'll work, but it doesn't show me the date. So how do I know the date worked? Here's the logical leap. So what we have to do is in our select statement, we're going to add one more column to the output. So we're going to go to the order table, pull in the order date. And you know what? Since we're aliasing, let's alias that too and make that look pretty. And say, oops, order date. Okay, so now when I run it, watch the output. Now I can verify by looking at the output basically that it is actually ordered or all the dates fall before 2004. You see that? Because how could I verify that before? I couldn't. I mean, right? I mean, how do I know that's correct? The only way I could have done it is by going into the database and looking at each one of the order numbers and going, all right, is that the right order date? Well, of course you don't want to do that manually, you guys, right? Use the technology, right? A query to add that in. The other little tip I'm going to give you here is when you start writing these select statements and they start getting kind of long, you might want to consider, and I'm just saying, starting to maybe list them like this, right? Because I think that's a little bit easier to look at. Because right now we're selecting 3 columns, and what if I had 20? Do you want it to go like one line? That's hard to look at. Here it's kind of like a grocery list. I see the column, I have a table prefix in front of it, I have my alias, it's all in a nice little clean list. So we'll call that the answer for number 4. Right. And once again, this was not required in the query. But how else are you going to get that information? How can you verify? All right, let's look at the next directive here. And I have it pre-copied as a comment, so I'm just going to grab it. So the next directive is display the product name, product, quantity ordered, and the ordered details table. So in other words, the parentheticals tell you what table it's coming from, and the price each from the orders table for a very specific order number. And it tells you use, products, orders, and order details tables. And once again, whenever you are doing these queries, look at your table structures and try to figure out where that stuff is. Right. So clearly the joining is implied here, and you can do this a few different ways. Okay, so one way is you can use the brute force method. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm just going to paste in the brute force method and show it to you because I have it pre-written. And I want, in other words, this is the non-inner join approach. I'm going to run it. I just wanted you to see the results here. It works. The logic of it is actually okay. All right, but now I'm going to build it. And I should probably say this. And I'm asking the question, would this actually be okay? So we'll find out from the results of doing the correct way. All right. With joins, so I'm going to label it alternate version using the joins, which is really the preferred version. And I should probably say that here, right? Because that's really kind of what the chapter is about. Is some of this is going to be the same. So let's just take a look at, for example, that should all be the same, right? For sure. We're still selecting the same columns. But now we're going to rewrite this part. So I'm going to borrow this statement, and then I'm going to break it apart and re-engineer it. So the first table is the one we're pulling from. And then are you guys noticing something else that's really weird here? Do you notice that I'm aliasing the tables and I'm not using the keyword as? So there's another little tidbit. I should throw this in there. Notice table aliases without as keyword. That works too, by the way. And I just pointed out because some people do it this way. All right, with these other ones, instead of like doing a big from statement, I am going to say inner join. I'm going to do the same here. All right. Will this product criteria where the product code matches the product code, is that still valid? Absolutely. So we'll copy that and we'll add that line. Let me get this stuff out of the way here. And then do we need the order details table? And notice how that one's got a two-letter thing. Makes sense. Order detail, order, right? Do we still need this line where order numbers match? Yes. So that's an and condition. So this has to be true and this has to be true. I will also say that if that seems confusing and you're losing the fact that the and is part of the where, just indent it, you know, and I think that's okay. Then we can get particular and filter down on the actual order number. So here's a rewrite using no as keyword for aliasing, right? With inner joins. Let's run it and see what the output is. Do we get the same output? Well, I didn't memorize the previous output, but it looks the same to me, right? How could I verify that? Well, I could run the query above again. Here's another helpful tip when you're writing database stuff like this. You can take a SQL file like this where you're writing the code and you can try all these different approaches, keep every approach you tried on the screen. You only have to run one of them. You don't have to run all of them. And then when you finally figure out which query is really the best one, you can delete the other ones. They don't have to be there if you're going to like save it and make it a procedure or something like that. So that's the answer to number 5, folks. Oh, and that's it. We're all done. All right. Wonderful. All right, folks. Well, that will conclude this video, and we are actually done early today. What a wonderful thing. This recording ends.